But after taking that class, it was very empowering. And I think when you watch your skills kind of evolve over the course of a week, it makes you more excited about like what else you can do in the future and how you can apply all of those skills and that knowledge. And to me, if I want to make a piece of art, I want to be able to do every part of it. I think of some of these artists who they'll have other people do portions of their work because they don't know how to work with metal, or they don't know, they come up with a concept, but they might not actually be making the whole entire piece, and that to me, it kind of takes away from, the fun of it in a sense, and the authenticity of, what an artist can do. To me, if I think of a project, I want to know that I can do every single bit of it.
Welcome back to Create and Connect, the podcast. I'm your host, Tom, from the Phoenix Woodshop. Today, I'm excited to talk with Dre Fandetti, known on Instagram as Crafts with Dre. She's a maker and an artist specializing in epoxy works who has a colorful and creative social media presence. However, to pay the bills, she's an occupational therapist, which only emphasizes her kindness and compassion for others. Dre has been a presenter at Maker Camp in the fall and during their winter intensive weekends. She's also been found under a welding helmet at the Lincoln Electric tent with a big smile, cheery eyes, and an enthusiastic attitude. Dre is always generous to share her experience with epoxy and connect with people who share our colorful artistry. She's a brand ambassador for Total Boat and Maker Epoxy, and she has spent years building real skill and a real voice in the maker world. Not just making things, but teaching other people how to find their own creative process along the way. I'm one of those people. So thank you, Dre, for being patient with me, for being inspiring, and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Tom. And thank you for that little intro. You almost got me like teared up over here.
Yeah, it's nice to speak with you. It's nice. Thank you so much for sharing your time. I know everybody is scrambling with life. You were very patient with me at the Epoxy Winter Intensive. That was the one intensive that I really wanted to take because me and the chemicals don't really work out well. And every time I try to mix, I either hypotherm or the bubbles just pop out. And I get excited to use the torch.
Yes, I don't blame you.
Anything with flame.
Yep.
So tell me how you enjoy teaching, presenting, or sharing your experience with others.
Yeah. So first of all, you were a lot of fun in our classes because of how excited that you were about doing it. You know what I mean? And chemicals, it's not a guessing game, right? So a lot of times people just kind of like eyeball epoxy and they're like, this looks like it could be okay, and then they pour it, and then, epoxy is expensive. So it's one of those things where you really want to like nail down how to do it correctly so that you're not wasting money every time that you do it, right? And I feel like because of how complicated that it can be, I know for me, when I first started doing epoxy, I was I totally submerged myself into watching so many YouTube videos. Like, it's funny because the other day I was thinking about it and I was like, I wonder how many hours of time that I've actually put into watching YouTube videos just about epoxy. Because there's so much to learn and there's so many different techniques. And I feel like I wish that I had taken like an in-person class when I first started. And I think it would have taken a lot of, I consider that time well invested, you know what I mean? But, if you're learning in person, when you have questions, you can get an answer right away. If you have questions and you're doing it by yourself and you're learning on YouTube, you have to wait a while to learn whatever it is that you're trying to find out. So for me, I've always loved teaching. I feel like my mom was a teacher, so I feel like that has a lot to do with it. I feel like everything that I've learned from her, she always put it in such like a great way for me to understand it. Whether it was hands-on, whether it was listening to things, whether it was watching things, like she was always just such a great teacher. So I feel like because of being surrounded by not only her as a teacher, but my two aunts are also teachers. So it was just kind of being like surrounded, in a family of teachers, essentially. So for me, it kind of felt like second nature to just be able to, okay, let me do a class. I felt very like honored by Austin from the Maker Camp for, him asking me to actually instruct some of these classes. It was Really, really, truly an honor. And it's been so much fun. It's been great because, the intensives that we do at Maker Camp, it's basically, a 3-day class of just hanging out with people and really enjoying your time and learning something. And that in itself, I feel like everybody who's attended my classes, we've all walked away becoming really good friends after. And I always love that I love people in general. It's kind of why I went into, occupational therapy. But it's really, really fun just seeing people really interested in epoxy and just growing their skill set in general. It's really cool to see, somebody will attend a class of mine and then afterwards I'll, kind of stalk them on Instagram and be like, how are they doing? And seeing them implement their epoxy, knowledge into some of their projects going forward, it's always so cool to see it. It really, really is. And I always love when people tag me in it because I'm like, oh my God, look at how awesome they're doing. So it's cool to see that growth as well,
You were, we had a nice group of people, and
Yeah.
I had Kurt Bloom on my right. Across was Claudia and John. And Claudia was very enthusiastic, and she helped me with some adornments for some of the projects. And then when I was speaking with Kurt, he goes, I looked over at your section of the table and you had a lot of stuff. And I was thinking to myself, should I have brought more stuff? Am I not prepared? What's going on? But yes, I was excited to take your class. I had taken a previous class and it was at Workbench Con and it was with Jess Crow. And I was really excited to do that. And, Jess has some fantastic things and helped with creating Maker Epoxy and to simplify it to be one-to-one, because when I mix high performance, again, I hypotherm that every time. So yes, it is expensive and I'm trying to hone that and apply it to inlays for my flags and for tables, because if it doesn't turn out right, it's just not right, and it's trash. But the class that I took with Jess Crow was predominantly a demonstration, and you got to do a little bit of epoxy for a coaster. And it was a tough setting. To work with the epoxy, you need a weekend. And that's what made the winter intensive great, is because you got to work on it. You got the hands-on. You had you being kind and patient and just walking it through and be like, let's just slow down a little bit, because enthusiasm.
Enthusiasm makes you speed things up sometimes. And, that was one of the biggest things that I would stress in my classes. You have to truly take your time. You have to make sure that you have everything set up before you start mixing things. Because once you start mixing, you're on a time crunch. So, you can't be scatterbrained once you start stirring things. You really have to make sure whatever you feel like you need for whatever pour that you're doing, you have to have with you and ready to go. Either prepped, having stuff already in mixing cups, having all of your popsicle sticks ready. Like it's silly. It seems so silly, but it really makes a huge difference. Some of these epoxies, especially like high performance, I'm sure you've learned, it's a very short working time for the window, So it is, if you mix too much up, then yes, you're definitely going to have exothermic reactions. There's no doubt about that. So yeah, it's definitely something where you have to kind of be patient. And it's something that it took me a little bit when I first started. I was just so excited and I would be like, okay, I'm just going to go down there and immediately start mixing. And then I would be like, oh my God, I'm panicking because I don't have everything, So it really taught me a little bit of patience, which is hard, especially when you're really excited about things. You just want to just dive into it. But it's really important. Setup is important for sure.
That whole prep time, and any craftsperson will tell you it's not the actual labor, it's the prep, having the right tools, having the right procedure, and laying it all out and working clean. And epoxy can get messy quick. And
definitely.
So
well, it's funny because if you look in my shop right now, I have kind of a rule of thumb to prevent me from getting covered in epoxy. Essentially, what I'll do is I'll pour my projects and then I won't clean up right away. I really won't. I'll just kind of let everything be, as long as everything is like safe. There's not epoxy, loaded in a cup and just sitting there. Then I just kind of walk away and I let everything cure so that when I do clean up, I don't have epoxy getting all over my forearms and my hands and in my hair, which I've definitely had happen before, and it's not fun and I don't recommend it. But it's just one of those things for me. I always think about, epoxy does have a dangerous side to it. A lot of people don't realize that people can end up with sensitivities or true allergic reactions to it. So for me, I always try to avoid any skin contact. I think that's why, in my class, I was very much like, make sure you have gloves on. Make sure if you have anything on your body, go wash it off. Go run upstairs to your room, get cleaned up, come back down, because it's one of those things I never want anybody to end up getting harmed from it. And it's chemicals. When it boils down to it, it's chemicals. So people really, truly do need to understand it's not something that you should be doing barehanded. That's not good for you. But yeah, working clean is important, especially in terms of like any cross-contamination. If you're mixing something in a cup that already has some sort of residue in it, it can totally affect your pour, and if it's a project that you've put a lot of time and effort into, and now, you've essentially contaminated it, and now you have to start from scratch after you've put so much time into something, it's heartbreaking when that happens. It really is. And sometimes it's really hard to backtrack from that. Sometimes it's almost impossible to clean something up, so it's definitely important for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And that dust-free environment, I know that there's little tricks and to try to get it that way, but I've done some small tabletop pours in the backyard, and I came out later to check the cure, and there's a little fly. And so I've made the mistake of trying to take the fly out, and then that didn't work. I'm like, well, you're stuck. You got to stay there. And then I would have to sand slowly, clear that out, do another pour, make it nice. So there's so many different layers to learning epoxy. But
Definitely.
I also enjoy that you were very much present in the welding tent at Maker Camp, and you're not a one-trick pony. Like, you like to really get involved in a lot of what do you like about the welding and the forging?
So it's funny. When Lucas and I first started dating, so we only started dating like in 2021. So one of the first events that he and I went to was a blacksmithing event, and it was a hammer-in, and we just kind of, you can do whatever you want. So he and I really, really enjoyed it, to the point where we came home and ended up buying basically everything that you need to blacksmith. So do we have an anvil? Yes. Do we have a forge? We have 2. So we were like, we're going to be blacksmiths now, So did we really kind of totally submerge ourselves into it? Not really, but we have all of the stuff in case we ever wanted to. So, he and I, it's funny, he really started to kind of go from woodworking into more metalwork. He started to pick up doing welding. He ended up getting sponsored by Lincoln Electric. And then he and I actually went out to Cleveland, Ohio for a week, and we took a TIG welding class together. It was us, Jimmy DeResta, and Derek from Malden. We had so much fun. And Brandy from Studio Abe. And we had so much fun. I knew nothing about TIG welding. I truly knew nothing. I knew that you just had some filler wire and you had to use your hand and your other hand and your foot. And that was basically all I knew, But after taking that class, it was very empowering. And I think when you watch your skills kind of evolve over the course of a week, it makes you more excited about like what else you can do in the future and how you can apply all of those skills and that knowledge. And to me, if I want to make a piece of art, I want to be able to do every part of it. I think of some of these artists who they'll have other people do portions of their work because they don't know how to work with metal, or they don't know, they come up with a concept, but they might not actually be making the whole entire piece, and that to me kind of takes away from, the fun of it in a sense, and the authenticity of, what an artist can do. To me, if I think of a project, I want to know that I can do every single bit of it, So that's kind of the fun part about welding, is I look at pieces of art and I'm like, okay, could I do this? Could I do something similar to this? Can I be inspired by this and kind of do my own version of it? I just think the more skills that the better that you can be, in a sense, where you can truly make whatever you want. And that's kind of the fun part about Lucas and I being together is, there's a lot of stuff in terms of metalwork that I don't feel comfortable whether it's from a safety perspective or a knowledge perspective. But it's fun that I can go to him and I can say, hey, like, I really would love to make this. And he'll look at it and he'll let me know, yeah, we could totally do that. And I'd have to say, like, 80% of the time, he's like, yeah, we could do that if we wanted to, which is really cool. Some of the stuff is very outlandish and really large. And he's like, if we made something like that, like, we'd have a giant sculpture in our yard. And like, no. But yeah, I don't know. It's for me, it's funny because I think if I heard myself say this when I were younger, I would have looked at myself like I had 10 heads. But I feel like I'm kind of a nerd in terms of knowledge, It's funny, in school, I always really, really struggled attention-wise. And it wasn't until I was like a senior in high school that they were like, yeah, no, you have ADHD. So, prior to that, I always considered myself really like a kinesthetic, like hands-on learner. Now, knowing the skills that I do now, having the supports that I do and structure in my life and being able to kind of sit down and focus. When you finally find the things that are really interesting to you, you don't like shy away from the time that it takes to learn things sometimes. Like I find myself, especially just epoxy stuff, metalwork, I find myself like fully submerging myself into some of these things for hours and hours and hours. And I won't even realize it. You know what I mean? And it's funny because you think about when you're in high school, how you would struggle to sit there for a 45-minute long class. You know what I mean? So it's like, it's so crazy to see that evolution. But, I think it takes time in your life to understand what route that you're going to go down and what's going to be interesting to you. But then when you find what is interesting, like, it just makes your whole quality of life improve so significantly. I think about my life before all of this and now and how different that it is. I feel like I was somebody who I would like go out and never be home, and I was always socializing and constantly being out of the house, and I never wanted to really just sit down and like truly focus on something. And now having this in my, little toolbox of all of these different things that I can do, it's really like empowering to know that you can make something and you can walk away and you have a finished product and it's something that you're proud of, and that in itself, I feel like is really rewarding,
Well, losing the time in the workshop seems... There's podcasters are calling it the flow, where you're just working and the time is irrelevant. And then, you could do it with doom scrolling, but, that is engineered for you to waste time.
Yeah.
But once you find what you love doing, and I know that you're very passionate about your artistry, then it's a whole new ball game. And it sounds to me like you're connecting more with yourself and taking that time of knowing what, maybe not knowing exactly what the product's going to be, but just having the vision come to life, and that you're putting your heart and soul into it. So this isn't just a piece of work. This is yourself, an extension of yourself. And that's great. And so many people pick up that from you. That's why they enjoy seeing you at Maker Camp. That's why they, enjoy taking your class. And, you were, really infectious with your enthusiasm at class. That's what made it so great. And, it's, and again, thank you for being on the podcast, because I always enjoy sharing the time with you.
Well, thank you. No, thank you. I really appreciate it. Sometimes it's hard for me to see it, you know what I mean? But that's why I really appreciate hearing that feedback for sure. And like you were saying about the flow state, I feel like in terms of mental health, right? There's a lot of us who had certain vices. For me, before all of this, I feel like I was like a huge kind of a party animal. I love to socialize. Like, that. You see me, I'm always talking to somebody, right? So for me, that was kind of my way of socializing. But it was just really, really bad habits that were forming, and I think, sure, sometimes it's coping mechanisms. Sometimes it's just out of boredom, right? But I think about being in this space now where I don't find myself doing those things. You know what I mean? I find that what I'm doing is fulfilling. And like you were saying with that flow state, where for me, I don't really think about other things while I'm doing my art. And like that in itself, for my own mental health, it definitely provides me, like, that's my new coping when it boils down to it. That's my way of doing something for me. I think working in healthcare, and I'm sure a lot of people can kind of, feel similarly, it's tough because sometimes you're constantly doing things for other people for 40 hours a week, or more. And I think sometimes at the end of the day, you're just kind of like, you're exhausted, and sometimes your self-care might kind of go to the wayside in terms of like mental health self-care, and I feel like doing these kinds of things, making, creating, painting, doing epoxy, doing metalwork, that in itself, it really just, it helps. It helps when it boils down to it. It really helps me to just kind of clear my mind and just think about what it is that I'm doing and not really thinking about many other things, So sometimes I'm thinking of other things. A couple of our friends, we still go on the app Clubhouse and like chat here and there. So it's kind of fun. Like we'll throw an AirPod in, go on Clubhouse. All of us will be in our shops at the same time and just making things but chatting at the same time. So even that in itself, like that kind of gives me that socialization as well. But I'm doing something that is not, harmful to my body. And unless, of course, you don't have a respirator on, which is not great. But I've kind of created, Lucas, it's really nice. Lucas actually outfitted my shop where I have little like fume extractor going on in there as well. So that's made things a lot easier for me. And I've actually been looking into, they do have some new like resin air purifiers that just came out. So I'm looking into getting either one or two of those in my shop just to kind of, for me, I don't want to constantly be breathing in chemicals when it boils down to it. And I don't really, my shop is in a basement, so it's not like I can like crack a window, So, safety in general, obviously very, very important. But yeah, it's just, it's been so rewarding. It really has been really rewarding doing all of this. And I really have enjoyed being able to share that knowledge too. It's definitely, it's fun. It's fun to be able to kind of, sometimes I forget what I know until I have a class. And then I just find myself spitting out all of these facts. And I'm like, you kind of like forget that you know these things, until somebody asks you a question or you're, in a situation where you're like, oh, wait a minute. Like, I know how to handle this.
I was listening to Making It podcast with Jimmy, Dave, and, why did I just blank? Anyway, Jimmy was talking about he wanted to make a lamp, and he said he knew that the YouTube creation was out there somewhere. And he took all this time, and he found from one of his old video files, he had made it already, and he had forgotten that he had made it.
This is why I love Jimmy. That sounds about right. But he's somebody who's constantly creating, right? So like that's the other factor for him. He has made it all. He really has made it all. But I can totally see that happening. It's probably pretty common in terms of people who have been, lifelong makers. You hear of some people who they move their shop from point A and point B. I just actually saw a post the other day where somebody did metalwork and they just moved their shop from point A to point B. And then for a year or two, they hadn't unpacked a couple of their boxes. And it was funny because then they unpacked everything and they were looking through it and they were like, these are things that I forgot that I know how to do. These are certain, techniques that I've used in the past when they first started and they were really trying to really grasp as many skills as they could in terms of whatever, field that they're working in. And it's funny that you just kind of forget some of these things until you really go back and you reflect on it, or you find those older pieces and you're like, holy cow, I did this, But then it's kind of refreshing because then you're like, okay, now I have more in my toolbox than I thought that I did. And sometimes that's fun too, where you're like, okay, now I can incorporate some of these skills that I forgot that I know how to do, But yeah, and I think the cool part about epoxy too is that you can just be so creative with it. There's so many different techniques that you can do and so many different applications, and ones that sometimes you look at something, it's dangerous sometimes. I'll go into a store and I'm like, okay, what can I epoxy in here? Very dangerous. But that's kind of the fun part, is really truly challenging yourself. And there's always new stuff coming out, and that's really fun too. There's always different applications that sometimes you'd never even think about, which is fun. That's fun for me. I like to kind of spice it up. I think if I only did river tables my whole life, I would get bored really quick, right? But yeah, it's fun. It's fun exploring new avenues, especially so recently I've been epoxying balloons, and that has been a lot of fun. I'm not going to lie. It's initially terrifying because the very first coat that you're doing on a balloon, you are terrified that thing is going to pop and get epoxy all over your shop. So what I've been doing is I'll actually send you this because I know you were saying earlier about if you did a pour outside, how things can get contaminated, right? So it's actually like I was looking it up the other day because it took me so long. Lucas actually initially found this little device, but it initially, I guess, is being used for like growing mushrooms or something like that, where it's kind of a stagnant air little contraption that you can set up. And it's basically just PVC piping, and then you have like clear plastic around it.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I was doing when I was doing my balloons, I was like, okay, if this pops in the shop, like I am in so much trouble. It's not even funny. Like this is going to end up everywhere. So I ended up hanging up the balloons inside that. It's funny. The first layer, I actually wore safety glasses, which I never really do when I'm doing epoxy. But yeah, this little like container, it just kind of gave me the peace of mind where if it explodes, it's not going to go everywhere. I have it contained. I know that once I pour the epoxy, if there's any contaminants in the air, it's going to be really difficult for it to get into, that little container. But that has been like a huge lifesaver. Initially, the reason why we got it, this is so funny. So when Lucas and I first started making in our shop downstairs, he had his side of the shop. I had like a little quarter of the shop where my epoxy stuff was. And once Lucas really started to getting into like metalwork, a lot of times there would just be like little particles in the air, little things that he would, torch, and then it would be flying through the air and like land into my epoxy. And so that was
just wants to be with you.
And he succeeded in a couple of projects, so, and I know it's not like he did it obviously like intentionally by any means. He was just doing his projects. I was doing mine. So then finally he was like, you want to know what? Like, we got to try to find something that's going to keep all of this stuff out of your, artwork. And it was an awesome little implementation. So, and then once he really kind of saw me really get into epoxy, that was when he ended up building me my own shop. And I feel very like blessed and lucky to have that. Because now it's, I can control the environment in terms of temperature, in terms of whatever's flying around the air. I have my own ventilation, but yeah, it's tough. It's tough keeping everything clean. And it truly does feel like a clean room for me now, which is so helpful. Even just that in itself, I think kind of takes some of the stress out of it when everything's kind of curing. And, I'm sure you've felt the stress of like you pour something and you walk away and you're like, I pray to God that fly is not going to end up in my epoxy, but you never know what's going to happen. So, it kind of takes that part out of it, which gives me peace of mind. Again, you're saving your time, you're saving your money, you're not having to do extra steps. So it's been really definitely super, super helpful to have my own spot. So I feel very lucky, I'll tell you that much.
No, that's great having a dedicated space.
Yeah.
And, your creativity, you're constantly thinking of how to be creative and what to... And that, like you said, it could get expensive. Mm-hmm. When did you first consider yourself a maker? And then when did you consider yourself an artist?
I would have to say, I think I considered myself an artist before a maker. And a lot of it had to do with when I was younger. I think I was probably in middle school. My parents really saw, I loved art classes. I could have sat there. My art teachers were like, she's the most quiet person in class in art class. And my parents were like, what the heck? For me to be quiet, it's really rare. You know what I mean? So they saw the focus and dedication to, in my mind's eye, I knew what I wanted to make and I was going to figure out how to do it and try to get it as close to what I had in my mind, So then, with them seeing that, they ended up signing me up for oil painting classes. And I enjoyed that so much. It was actually a really wild story. This is a little segue for a second, but my teacher, she actually initially was left-handed. She had a stroke. She was fully impaired on her left side and taught herself how to paint with her right hand. And that was to me, it was the kind of precursor to OT of oh my God, this person completely retrained their body into doing something. And she was amazing. A phenomenal, phenomenal artist. But, taking those classes, it really kind of honed my skills of, just learning how to blend colors, learning what brush to use, learning the sequencing of painting something. I always wanted to jump into the details right away. And it really kind of, it allowed me to take that step back and be like, okay, form first. You have to make sure you have the form first and that you're not going into all of these intricacies without having the correct color dynamics. So, and then from there, I have to say in high school, I don't really feel like I painted as much. In college, I felt really lucky that, I went to a school where we had art lessons available. So I was able to take painting again and really kind of submerge myself into it. And then I think really right before COVID, I started to get back into painting again. And then when COVID happened, that was really when I started to kind of, okay, like, yes, I could paint, but what else could I do? And that was when I started to kind of, I'm pretty sure, I don't know the exact term that I had used to Google, but it was like other forms of artwork, essentially, I wanted to learn something new, and I'm happy that I did. I think about if I hadn't done that, my life would be so incredibly different now if I didn't, So it's really interesting. But I'm so happy that things worked out the way that they did, or else, I wouldn't be where I am now. I wouldn't have this amazing community of people, of makers, and all of these friends that you get to make at every event. It's just, it's been really cool. And then, in terms of a maker, I really don't feel like I considered myself a maker until probably like 2023. I feel I wanted to learn new things, but I don't think I really understood how to truly apply those things. And then having Lucas help me, build forms and kind of advance my skills a little bit more. I think that was when I really kind of truly felt like, yes, I'm in this maker community, but now I feel like a maker,
So let me ask you, what is the difference for you between an artist and a maker?
I honestly, truly almost feel like it has to do with the amount of skills, I think, in a sense. To me, when I think of a maker, I think of somebody who can really, truly take a bunch of different skills, whether it is epoxy and woodworking and metalwork and really kind of thinking outside of the box and then being able to apply all of those skills. In terms of art, I don't know, to me, I almost feel like it's a little more mentally in depth in a sense. I don't know why this is how I feel, but in my mind, I'm like, okay, yes, you can be a maker. You can make whatever. You can make a table, right? But if you don't have this artistic kind of a flair to it, you're making something, you're making furniture. If you are putting all of these wild embellishments and you're trying to kind of evoke some sort of emotion out of it, that's where the art comes into play in my mind, having different approaches. I don't know. I think it's just taking the making and then adding a little more flair to it, and really kind of personalizing it or making it incredibly unique. I think the uniqueness is definitely something, anybody could make a table, right? Whether or not they make a good looking table is a different story, So I think that's where the art kind of comes in, it's that finesse, truly.
Well, your maker swap gift of the table with the constellation of the couple intertwined,
Yeah.
and that is artistry. So it was beautiful to see. And, I think I kind of phoned it in a little bit and just used, the CNC and threw a couple of colors in there, so it wasn't quite as artistic. And
that's okay. You know what I mean? It's a maker swap, right? So That's okay.
Yeah.
You have a little leeway there. And I think as long as you're proud of it, you know what I mean? That I think with the maker swap for Maker Camp, I truly think that is kind of the goal that they're looking for in terms of what people are submitting. You want to walk away and be proud of what it is that you've entered in. In my mind, I wanted to make something that I was proud of, but also something that somebody would be really happy to receive in general, and I tried to kind of think of it. Would that have been something for everybody? Maybe not, but
Right.
The person that ended up getting it they were so pumped about it. And that is rewarding to see. You know what I mean? It's kind of nice when somebody gets something of yours and they're like, oh my God, I'm so excited I have this. That's rewarding to yourself, and it just kind of makes your heart feel like all of that time and effort that you put in was truly worth it, And I do think that a lot of people, it's tough for us as makers because not a lot of us are full-time makers. So I think in terms of, maker swap items, some of the people that are doing it, they're in a time crunch, whether it's that they have really busy work lives and family lives, or, sometimes mentally it's tough to start things, sometimes the initiation is a little bit tricky, and I encourage anybody who's listening that's going to Maker Camp, start your stuff now. come up with some ideas. I'm still kind of mulling over what it is that I'm going to be doing for it. And I am somebody who notoriously works well under pressure. I think it's the ADHD thing. We really thrive on timelines and deadlines. So it's funny because the pour that I did for that table, I did like 2 nights before.
Oof.
And, I have a really sketchy way of kind of quick curing things. I don't recommend this. People that are listening, don't do it. But cranking up the heat here and there definitely can help cure things a little bit quicker. So it's funny, if you walked into our room at Maker Camp, we usually go, the night before to help set up because of, being a demonstrator, you really need to have everything set up ahead of time. And if you had walked into our room at the Maker Camp, it was like 80 degrees in there. It was so hot, but it cured it in time, and that was the important part. So, sometimes it is, something where in terms of the maker swap, sometimes you're working until the very last second, but I don't recommend doing that. So those of you listening, make sure that you kind of start thinking about it now and start, just initiate it, just start it and then go from there. But
well, I didn't have to crank up the heat, but I had to attach the legs to the table that I submitted before I handed it in. So
I think a lot of people, it's funny because of like just the theme of the weekend, right? So many people will kind of have these like 75% finished products for their maker swap. And they're like, you want to know what? I don't have this tool, but it's going to be at Maker Camp. And so they'll take advantage of it there, and that's okay. That's totally okay. Do you want to be handing somebody sticky epoxy? Probably not. But if it's in terms of, you're just hammering stuff together or, welding something up, it makes sense. Not everybody has a welder. So, but I do love the Maker Swap. That is definitely, and shout out to Working Hands Podcast for putting that on. Tony and Keith, they put so much time and effort into that. And I really feel like this past year, I love those guys. They are so much fun. And Lucas and I, try to help them out with kind of the logistics of it. And I felt like this past year, I think it was like under a half an hour that they were able, I forget it was under a half an hour or an hour, but it was like a really short amount of time compared to the very first time that they did the Maker Swap. And it was like 3 hours long or something. So the fact that they've kind of gotten it down to like a well-oiled machine in terms of having the swap happen, having certain drop-off times so that they can enjoy their weekend as well. And then the people that volunteer to help out, I mean, those guys and girls, they're fantastic. They put their time and effort into it as well. But it's such a cool concept in general, and the fact that it really allows you to kind of think outside the box and challenge your own skills. And for me, I'm always trying to think of different ways to kind of improve my own, set of skills. So for me, doing, I did something really different on that. So the outline of that couple intertwined, I ended up using this like raised paint, and I kind of created a little bit of like a wall around the couple, and the epoxy that I had poured around them was like a little bit darker. And the reason was I wanted to make a little more contrast so that the couple and the galaxy kind of stuck out a little bit more. And like, it was just them in a galaxy, like their own little galaxy, in this crazy space, So I really loved that. I do want to actually do another one. I have to find a table that is similar to that. It was kind of like a recessed table where it was almost like a bowl on top of, the table. So I have to try to see if I can find something similar. It was like something I found in TJ Maxx, and again, here I am, going through stores, thinking about what I can epoxy. And that happened to be one of them. And I had that table for years. I literally had it for years. And then finally saw something, it clicked, and I was like, you want to know what? I can do all of this. I can incorporate the galaxy. I can get this couple on there. I can do the depth of each of those pores. It was multiple pores in order to get that galaxy to really look deep.
Well, I'm sure you know somebody with a CNC.
Oh, definitely.
Table, and they could make that tabletop for you, so you have the edge where the pour doesn't go out, and you can do multiple layers.
Yeah, with that one, it was actually metal. So it was a very, very thin gauge metal, and it was just like all painted black. very like lightweight. So that's why I kind of liked it so much, because I think if I did do it out of wood, it would have been probably a lot heavier. And there would have been a lot more steps in terms of having to seal it and all of that jazz, you know? So it was nice that it was already like prefabbed and I could just kind of work with it from there, which like, is that cheating? I don't really know, but we won't tell anybody, right, podcasters?
It was definitely the artistry of creating and rebranding. So that's great.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I was looking at your Instagram account, and you have 79.5 thousand followers. That's some accomplishment. So you're no longer a micro influencer. You are an influencer. So congratulations.
Thank you. It's been really crazy watching that number creep up, and it's not something that really truly happened like instantly. It wasn't something that, you know, it takes time in terms of social media. I think a lot of people don't really understand what goes into, even though it might be a 60-second video, how much time that can go into just editing things and all of the footage that you have to look through and try to find, you know, these small little clips that make sense in a sequence and that it's going to be engaging your viewers. You know, there's this like rule of, you know, you have to try to capture people's attention in the first 3 seconds of your video. And just that in itself was really kind of enlightening to learn, because then it makes me kind of step back and I truly look at those first 3 seconds. How am I going to really hook somebody in to watch the rest of this video? I do attribute it to, there's a couple of videos that did go kind of like viral in a sense. So there was one that happened really early in the game where Total Boat has a paint that's called Total Gold. And what I ended up doing was taking a flower that I just had around the house, and I was like, you know, this could look really cool if it was just like fully gold. And so I dipped it into the bucket of paint and then started to pull it out, but I didn't show like the full reveal at the end, and the internet was so mad at me. And so they made it known in the comment section. And then, you know, people are sharing it and they're like so aggravated, and it was kind of funny, but also like I kind of felt bad. And then when I did finally like post the, you know, the end product, people didn't really care. You know what I mean? Like, they don't really care as much because they don't see it. And so unless they're going to your profile and like searching it out, then they don't really care. The second video that really took off was another one that, again, it's funny that I feel like it's not like I try to like rage bait the internet, but it feels like that is how a lot of videos unfortunately get a lot more views, is when people are angry because they'll let you know in the comments. So the second video, we went to a Fab Tech conference where it's basically just anything in terms of metal fabrication, tools, anything. It's this huge convention. And they have so many different things that you can demo there or just, you know, see how they work. And there was one company that Lucas actually works with, and they had me use, I think it's called a flex arm drill. And it's kind of like a little like hydraulic drill. It's super cool, super easy to use. I had never used one before, and they were like, hey, do you want to give it a try? And I was like, yeah, sure. So now, it's funny because we've talked to this company since, you know, this whole entire thing happened. And I asked the kid, I was like, did you get in trouble? And he was like, no. He's like, everybody kind of gives me shit. You know what I mean? And he was like, but he's like, at the same time, don't worry. This guy had me use the tool. He didn't give me safety glasses. And now this is a drill going into metal. It's a very like slow, you know, revolution on it. It's not like it was like, you know, spitting out metal, but, you know, it does have some like swarf that comes off of the drill when you're drilling things. And my hair was down. And then I also had a lanyard like name tag. And so with these three things, and
the trolls must have gone crazy.
My God. They were like, she could have cut her hand off. She could have lost an eye. Her hair could have got caught into it. And you know, her name badge could have gotten sucked in there. And so like these people, and I appreciate, for those of you who have followed me, thank you. But I appreciate your awareness to safety. That's always fantastic. And it's funny because as some of that swarf was like coming off of, you know, what we were drilling into, I kind of like put my hand up because I didn't want it to get caught into my hair or my lanyard. And so people lost their minds over that too. So, you know, that ended up accruing, unfortunately, millions of views. And, of course, the more that people comment on something, the more that your video, continues to kind of get out there. People share it more. They say, look at this idiot who's, doing this stuff without any safety stuff on, like they share it with their friends and they're like, this person's stupid. So here I am. And then I think the other video that more recently got some attention, so I guess there's like two more that just got some attention. One of them was when I was epoxying the balloons. A lot of people were like, I don't understand how you're doing this and the balloon isn't popping. Which, I was just using an epoxy that is a higher viscosity and I was pouring it in a thin coat and I made sure to not let it get warm while I was pouring. You know what I mean? It was, in my mind, I'm like, it was a very simple application. For other people, if they're using something like a high performance epoxy where it gets hot quick, I think a lot of people think that that's what I was using, which I wasn't. I was using tabletop epoxy. And then the most recent one was a technique. So if you have epoxy, if it's in this case, it was a board that was covered in an epoxy wave. If you take a Dawn power wash and you spritz it all over something and then you spray paint it and then you wash away the Dawn power wash, it actually leaves what looks like almost like sea foam. So that was another one where people were just like, what are you using? How are you doing this? So again, comment section really went off. And, I love when that happens because, again, it kind of gives me the opportunity to teach people. And I love sharing knowledge. I'm not somebody who's like a gatekeeper on those kinds of things. I think the more that you can educate people, the more that they're able to do what they want to do, So, but it's been a wild kind of a roller coaster in terms of, when you start to get followers, there's sometimes this huge influx and then there's like the downswing that happens where, sometimes people are like, ugh, I followed this person because of this video and now I'm not seeing any videos that are like this anymore. So like, for example, with the flex arm video, right? So that had something to do with Metalwork. I no longer, it's not like I was constantly using the flex arm after that, so some people will just unfollow. And that's kind of like a little bit of a heartbreak. You see your numbers go up and then you see them start to drop down. But it's a normal thing to happen, and it can be a little sad because you get so excited that you're like, oh my God, I've gotten so many. And then you see it drop and you're like, oh my God, do people hate me? Like, what's happening? So it does create a little imposter syndrome, I'm not going to lie, but it's been cool. Well, it's definitely been really cool.
You've got 10,000 more followers than Lucas, so you're doing great.
Oh my gosh, don't bring it up. He's going to be so mad. Don't bring it up.
Just between me and you. That's all right.
No, it's funny. He's been getting frustrated because it's been like he's been at this like consistent number for, a couple years now. And he's like, I don't get it. And I was like, you have a very like niche kind of an audience, and I was like, unless you have some random video where you're doing something really stupid, like take off, you know what I mean? He's also somebody who he's very much an educator as well, and I think it's, in my mind, I think it's fantastic that he has a large number of followers and it stays pretty consistent. In my mind, I think that's kind of a good sign. If you see that number and it really drops a lot, then, you're losing your attention of your followers and they're not feeling like they're getting value out of what it is that they're seeing, So I always tell him, I'm like, it's just, that's your niche, So it is wild though, because I do feel like there are a lot of accounts that are out there that they're accounts will have these they really truly are like random videos sometimes that will just pop off that are completely different from what they normally post. And I do find that's kind of strange in a sense because here you are putting all of this time and effort into some of these edits and you really think that they're going to do well. And then it's like one random video that's, 20 seconds long that you're like, man, let me just post this. This should be interesting. And then that's the thing that takes off. You know what I mean? And it's like, what the heck?
There's no science to it, and they'll tell you, once you learn the algorithm, they change it.
Yeah.
And I'm at 3.5.
Which is not easy to do. It's not easy to do.
I gave myself the challenge, I think it was after 6 months of joining Instagram, I'm going to post one reel every day for a year.
Heck
and
yeah.
I was on my way to hitting 3,650, but somewhere at 280 days, it just stopped. I stopped getting, and I have no rhyme or reason. And you know what? I had to realize that will drive the small business for advertising and marketing, and that's it. And then I had to just be comfortable with the fact of I'm happy being word of mouth and having people ask me to make a commemorative flag for whatever reason, as opposed to anytime I get an order that is via the, an email or web page, there's a lot more pressure. So, but it's amazing how the trolls drive the bus. And I see a few people, like I know Chris Powell, he loves it. He just
rage
drives
bait.
it. Yeah, it's great. All right, let me do a couple
rage bait king.
Let me do a couple of rapid fire questions. We'll wrap it up a little bit. Pizza or tacos?
Pizza.
All right, good answer.
Yeah.
What are you listening to in your shop?
Oof. Well, if I'm not on Clubhouse, I recently put a TV down there, and it's funny because I don't think I love it. I think it kind of takes away my distraction. Like it distracts me more than anything. If I am listening to any music, sometimes I just need silence, to be perfectly honest. Sometimes I need to just think and not be distracted. If I am listening to anything, sometimes it's like Flume, which is kind of like a more like an electronic kind of music in a sense, where it's just kind of calm. Sometimes I need to not have words to music, and it just kind of allows me to get into that flow state. So it kind of depends. Depends on the mood. Sometimes it's Broadway musicals.
Whatever gets you in the flow, that's great.
Oh, yeah. What
about your favorite tool in your shop?
It's a tie between the heat gun and my torch for sure. I have two different Bernzomatic torches. One is almost like a creme brulee torch, and then the other one is a fine point torch. And each kind of have their own benefits. I feel like the fine point one is it's incredible. It's so cool. These tiny, tiny little things, you can just be so accurate with your flame, which you need if you're using silicone molds. But I think it's probably a tie between those two.
I like that creme brulee torch. I use that for cigars. It's helpful.
Sick. I love the flow of the flame. You know what I mean? You can kind of adjust your intensity, and that I love for sure.
What are you most excited about working on right now?
So it's actually funny. One of the local breakfast/deli spots, they are interested in getting some epoxy balloons. And so we kind of chatted a little bit about it, and I'm going to add a different technique to what I've been doing. I'm not going to talk about it just yet because you guys are going to have to wait and see it. I get really nervous about if I share some of my techniques. I always want to be the first to do it because that's kind of the fun part of me being creative. And I've had it happen before where I've talked about it and then somebody else did it first and it made me so mad. So you guys are just going to have to wait and see it. But I am honestly really, really excited because I've never really done this before. So you guys are going to have to wait and see. Hopefully I'll have it done by the time this airs.
All right, last question. If time and money wasn't an issue, what would you be working on?
Probably getting a really big shop. Lucas and I kind of dream about it every now and then, where we have this one apple tree that's in our yard, and we always joke around about listen, when this thing dies, we're going to knock it all down and we're going to build a shop over there. So I think a shop where both of us kind of could still be close to each other, have a bunch of space. For him, he'd have all of the room for his tools and machines and all of that jazz. Be a lot easier to get in and out of compared to in the basement. And then for me, just having a temperature controlled shop. I mean, for me, it's not I need a crazy amount of space in terms of where I work. It's really the storage of all of the materials and molds and, epoxy, everything. Sometimes I find myself I'm oh, it's really cramped in here and I need to get rid of some things, which is sometimes tough. But I think just having more storage would be fantastic. I think that's what I would do, and maybe pay off my student loans in a different world,
Yeah, reality.
Yes.
So if people want to see your artistry and your making, where can they go? How can they find you?
So they can find me on Instagram, Crafts with Dre, Facebook, and I do have a TikTok. I don't really post on it as much, but feel free to go and follow that one too if you want. I don't really have many YouTube videos. I don't have a website. I did try Etsy. That was not my jam for sure. But yeah, if you guys have any questions about epoxy or, just want to bounce some ideas off of me, or you have questions about, what kind of epoxy do I need for this project, don't hesitate to reach out, please. I actually really love when people reach out. So even if you're like, have this little, man, I don't want to bother her, reach out to me, please. Don't feel like you need to not reach out. I am more than happy to help people out. So,
Dre, thanks so much. Thank you for helping me out.
Yeah.
And it's always a pleasure to speak with you. And hopefully I get to see you. Will you be at the Rest-A-Cart?
I don't know if we're going to go to that. I know we're going to be going to the Timber Inn. It's kind of tough because it's, like 3 hours away. But I think, what is it, July 17th to the 19th, they're going to have the Timber Inn. And so we always go to that one. It's just such a fun weekend. It's really very like chill. And I think Lucas and I really enjoy that, where, you just get to work on using some hand tools, building some structures. Who knows? It might be used for peacocks. We don't know. But it's always a super, super fun event. But we'll see about the Rest-A-Cart. We'll see what the weekend holds. So, but Lucas and I, we always love going to these events. And you'll definitely see us at Maker Camp in October. But yeah, that's what we'll be doing. So.
Yeah, well, my next challenge is to get Lucas on the podcast, so we'll see if we can make that happen.
I know. I have a feeling you'll be successful. But thank you again, Tom. I really appreciated chatting with you. It's been a blast, so thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate it.
Yeah. All righty.
I'd like to thank Dre again for joining me on Create and Connect podcast. It's always nice to catch up with a friend. Make sure you check out her Instagram page, Crafts with Dre, and see some of the new things that she's working on. She's always posting. She's very prominent on social media. And if you would like to join the maker community, jump in. There's plenty of room. So if you like this podcast, please share it with somebody else. Please hit subscribe and let us know how we're doing. Remember, keep creating, keep connecting.